When players are using 5.1 or 7.1 speaker systems, there are a few things you might want some control over. Within a sound class, you can adjust how much of the sound bleeds into the rear speakers or the LFE channel, and you can send sounds or specific amounts of a sound to the center speaker, which can sometimes be useful to maintaining the clarity and comprehensibility of dialogue. In terms of speakers and routing, the first thing to notice in the sound class asset is the stereo bleed. This is the amount that a stereo sound source can bleed into the surround speakers, which might be useful for ambient sounds, for example. Then there's the LFE bleed. LFE stands for Low Frequency Effects Channel. This is the 0.1 in a 5.1 or 7.1 speaker setup. The bleed amount defaults to 0.5, so this means that 0.5 of the sound signal is sent to the LFE channel. The terminology around this can be quite confusing. All the channels go to discrete speakers, and the LFE typically goes to the subwoofer speaker, commonly referred to as the sub. Now, there may be certain instances where for specific sounds or classes of sounds you want to exclude them from going to this LFE channel. If the low end of your mix is getting particularly boomy and cluttered, for example, or you may want more of this signal to go to the speaker for a specific effect. But this is complicated by the bass management of the player's playback system. Very often, the low-end frequencies of the other speakers also go to the sub. So if you decide not to send any of the sound to the LFE channel, the low frequencies of this sound may actually end up getting played by your sub anyway, since the bass management of the playback system will send them there. So to conclude, your management of the low frequencies of your mix is probably best handled through careful planning and use of EQ on the sound sources themselves. 5.1 and 7.1 systems originated in the cinema, and there's a cinematic tradition with regard to dialogue that's also worth considering for your games. For a long time, the center speaker in a cinema 5.1 setup would be reserved just for dialogue, and even today, in many films you'll find very little dialogue panning. There's a couple of reasons for this. Firstly, our ears are particularly sensitive to the frequency ranges of the spoken voice, so any coloration in that voice that might come from them moving around to different speakers is going to be particularly noticeable. Secondly, the cinematic tradition of storytelling through sequences of shots has a dramatic impact on dialogue panning that can be distracting. In the demonstration project Meadow area, that's shortcut key 3, there's a tannoy. The villagers like to gather here daily to listen to an educational and enriching story. If we wanted to see a character's reaction to that story, we might have the camera occasionally move out of their point of view and instead look back at the character themselves. This kind of back and forth with camera positions is very common in cutscenes.
Today's story is called The Bulls and the Lion. Is everybody sitting comfortably? Then we'll begin. A lion had been watching 3 bulls feeding in an open field. He had tried to attack them several times, but they kept together and helped each other to drive him off.
Okay, so we're not recording in 5.1, so you won't hear that kind of dramatic movement of the dialogue from the front speakers to the rear speakers, but even stereo you can get some idea of how disruptive that might be. As we've observed before, dialogue often conveys crucial gameplay information. And so even outside of cutscenes, there's good reasons why you might want to ensure that it's always clearly audible. By using the voice center channel volume of a sound class, you can ensure that a given amount of the signal always goes to the center speaker. This can help make dialogue more audible and mitigate some of the effects of moving cameras during cutscenes. You can also adjust the voice center channel volume dynamically using sound mixes. You might remember the buried treasure area in the woods, where we want to draw attention to the footstep sounds so that the player can hear when they've walked over the treasure chest. So here in the sound mix for that area, Enter Del, you can see that we've dynamically adjusted the voice center channel volume to 4 to bring those footsteps into particular focus. With all of these routing options, if you have a 5.1 or 7.1 setup, the best thing is just to experiment with these to hear the effect, since it's difficult to illustrate with stereo sound. The center channel volume enables you to make some subtle adjustments. There are other occasions where you might want the whole of the audio signal to go to the center channel speaker. Let's revisit the fairy who's lost in the first cave and just listen to that dialogue for a moment.
I'm just saying the same phrases over and over. I think I'm going mad down here.
So we can hear that that dialogue clearly belongs in that world. It's got reverb on it and it's panning around us. Now there might be certain instances where you want more of an in-ear headset type effect. So the voice is direct to the player and isn't broadcast into the game world itself. Now the fairy dialogue at the moment is using the dialogue sound class. So let's just extend that dialogue sound class and create a new one called dialogue in ear. And what we're going to do with this sound class is we're going to send it to the center channel only. So we'll just assign that sound cue to our new dialogue in ear sound class and see the effect that that has.
Do you know the way out? Can you help me find my way out?
So even in a stereo fold down of that, you can hear that the dialogue is no longer panning. Now, if it's an in-ear radio type dialogue, we also don't want it to broadcast into the world here, and so it wouldn't logically have reverb on it. Now, the reverb in this cave is being implemented via an audio volume that you can see here, and that operates on the master reverb submix. We've mentioned this in a previous video, but sound classes allow us to switch that off. So any sound playing on this dialogue in-ear sound class now will be excluded from that master reverb. That combination of center channel only and removing the world's reverb creates the kind of in-ear dialogue that we're after.
It's cold down here. I came down here looking for my friend and now I can't find the way out.
As well as the center channel options and the option to disable the master reverb, you can also choose whether ambient volumes are applied to the sound, which you might remember are used for the basic occlusion in Unreal Engine. And for specific consoles, you can determine whether the sound is output to the speaker or the actual controller. In this video, we've looked at the options for routing audio to specific speakers that are available to us within a sound class.